Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Ask GN. As always, leave your questions in the comment section below if you have them for next episode. Next week we'll be at CES in Las Vegas for the Consumer Electronics Show. So if we do one of these, it'll be there, but it might more likely just be a bunch of news from the show about PC hardware. So getting into the start of things, we have a short mail segment this time, I guess, because I got some, I guess Christmas presents from NZXT. I gotta fish them out here. So NZXT sent this over the holidays. You may remember our review of the S340 Elite, which is right here, and things that I said about the puck. It is literally a piece of rubber with magnets in it. They're very happy about it, and it does this. Check this out. Might have missed it, but it's stuck in front of the case now. So NZXT decided, because of how much we loved their cable management rubber puck with magnets in it, to send me two more of that very same thing. I guess this is our first ever unboxing. I'm gonna make sure it's not a threat or something like that. Oh, it's a white one. Okay, I didn't know they made those. So there you go. There's our present from NZXT. Two more of these things, and they sent a family photo, I believe signed by Johnny, the CEO, saying, "Wishing you happy holidays and an awesome 2017, you passive-aggressive bastards." All right, so that's enough for the mail segment. Let me just put that back in there. We might actually use those. We'll probably keep those around for props. Don't worry, they're not the big pieces of rubber aren't being thrown out. So that's that. CES is next week, as I said. This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. If you want to help us out in creating more content at the frequency we've been doing it lately, which is about a video a day almost, then go to patreon.com/gamersnexus and check it out there. Probably going to be expanding the rewards in that pretty soon in 2017. The first question I have is one I have a live demo for. It's not a very complex one, but live demo nonetheless. This is from Christopher Bjørkeng, who says, "Is it worth buying a high-end power supply just because it's higher quality and has less chance of blowing up?" So yeah, there's a few things that make higher-end power supplies actually properly higher end, and the probably most noticeable one between something like a $20 no-brand PSU, other than cable support and things like that, the biggest difference between something like that or some really low-end PSU and something that's at least half decent, like most of the stuff you'd find in the sort of $70 range, is the protection. So you get a lot of stuff like short circuit protection, OCP, OVP for overcurrent and overvoltage protections, things of that nature. And those would be useful, if you don't know, for an instance where either through user error or through component level failure, your power supply will, at least to some degree, attempt to protect your system. An example of this would be if we hooked up a motherboard to a case and there's something bridging contact between an IC or something like that, some contacts on the motherboard and a steel panel, and that causes a direct short. It's not a good thing, but normally it's not going to kill anything. It's just, in theory, it should just not turn on or should shut down immediately. Another example of something would be, as you saw in our power supply PSA, would be if you plug in a non-spec cable, like I think in our example in that video, we had the Silverstone and EVGA power supply. If you took a power supply cable from one of those, plugged into the other, which you shouldn't do, and you end up sending 12 volts down ground or something like, or down common or something like that, you could end up with dead components, at least potentially sending current in the wrong direction, reverse polarity basically, and really hurting something. So a good power supply will protect you from that at least somewhat, and that's a good thing. Now, let's say you're like, oh, I'm not going to make a mistake, so I'm not worried about it. Other things like things falling out, screws falling out of, not screwed in right, or computer gets moved, it would help protect from some shorts deriving from that, depending on where it falls. Not all of them, because that's a pretty bad problem. Other things that a good power supply, your efficiency, of course, improves a lot of the time with the good PSUs. And efficiency with a power supply, you're basically looking at how efficiently does this unit convert the power from the wall to the power used in the computer. And if I were to ask you, what is the power supply's purpose in a computer, it's not really to provide power, to supply power, as it's contained in the name. It's actually to convert power. So you end up with AC at the wall, DC in the computer, the power supply converts it. You have loss of energy through heat or other inefficiencies in the unit, depending on how low or high end it may be. So that's another obvious advantage, and that's pretty clear. I say obvious because 80 plus is everywhere, and they do a pretty good job of outlining exactly what the requirements are for each level of 80 plus. So that's an example also where you would gain some benefit. Now, will you make up for the extra expense to buy something like 80 plus gold or platinum in your power savings? Maybe not. Depends on how long you have that power supply. But minimally, you're using less power from the wall, and it's more efficient in its conversion, and the heat should be lower and things like that, which is not a bad thing. It's just not something you necessarily need in a computer if you're on a budget. V-droop is another thing, voltage droop. If you have a good power supply, you should hopefully not have too much voltage ripple down the rails, and that means that you could, in theory, maintain a more stable overclock. How much that impacts kind of a casual overclocker, I would say not very much, but it's another one of the small, many benefits that add up with PSUs. And now one of the last ones I wanted to mention, there's plenty more. You can read Johnny Guru's website for far more depth on this. He knows a lot more than I do about power supplies. But one more thing that's worth showing is if you have a power supply that can do it, and I'm only using this one because I have it, not because it's product placement. If you have a power supply that can do it, you can actually gain some benefit in a surge. So if there's a power surge and you very briefly lose power, then what happens with something like this is it'll stay on a bit longer. This is a Platmax PSU. It's pretty damn expensive. Stays on a bit longer, bigger capacitors, things like that. So it'll get you through really short surges. And all I'm going to do right now is connect the black and the green to turn it on. Okay, black and green, yes. Let's see if this paperclip will work. Okay, so I'm going to hold that there and flip the switch. Damn it. Okay, we're going to flip the switch and then I'm going to put it there. Okay, power supply is on, I think. Fan should be spinning, yes. And now I am going to kill power. Ooh. Kill power, all right. And it is still spinning. It'll turn off eventually. This one lasts about 10 seconds with nothing connected to it. It's not drawing any power. So you can see it's still on. I've flipped the power switch. We can even unplug the cable for good measure. And it'll keep spinning. It's clearly no connection to outside power right now. And our fan will eventually turn off. And this would not be, you wouldn't get quite as long an effect with this if you had components connected. Without any components connected or not drawing any power, the power supply, as far as it's concerned, this is effectively a surge scenario. You've lost power to the unit, and yet it's still on. And just now, something like maybe 15 or so seconds later, the fan has turned off. Just a quick additional note here on the fan, it'll also partly spin because it's trying to keep the fan spinning in the system to lower temperature prior to shutdown. This is part of the features of this power supply, but it's a mix of basically you get some level of surge protection because it'll hold its power for a very short period of time, long enough normally to survive a 1-second surge, and then the rest of it is just trying to spin down the fans and keep the temperatures low before shutting it down completely. And ideally, in terms of saving your data, you would want to get something like a UPS or battery backup rather than rely on your power supply, but an extra step in the chain certainly doesn't hurt. So that's another example of something good from a high-end power supply. Again, it's another one of those things where, as a normal user, who cares? Maybe you lose some progress in a game. That would suck, but this thing, I don't know the prices today, but when I originally got it, I think it was like a $200 power supply, maybe more, because it's a high wattage one. So something like this would be really beneficial if you are doing rendering or production, where losing power means that you might lose all of your progress on a render, and that would be not good. So in that event, something like this is kind of making you money in a business sense, in that you're not wasting it when you have a small surge for a few seconds. So that's a more obvious, like, clear to show example of power supply benefits. Again, not everyone needs something like that, but it's not like it's just marketing. There's actually a reason you would get a high-end PSU. Voltage checkpoints are another nice thing. Some of them have them built in with LEDs, so you can kind of check on things as it's live without needing to probe directly with the multimeter. Next question is from Reps Up 100, is a regular. Reps Up says, how do you feel about Nvidia pushing GeForce as a platform and not just components? I asked in the comments for clarity on that, and he was basically asking about the new $10 a month GeForce Elite service. So that was something that was announced, I think, the day of our filming of that Nvidia versus AMD Why Are They So Polarizing video. We filmed it maybe a week before we posted it. And after filming that, it's kind of like, oh, that would have been really useful to have. Because I mentioned Red Team Plus, AMD's program, and this GeForce one kind of reminds me of that in some ways. And the main one is that it's designed to get people involved in a way that tries to build brand loyalty from that user toward the company. So in the case of this GeForce one, let's kind of briefly look through what was leaked, because it was basically a leak, a job posting leak, I think. Some of the basics were, with the $10 a month GeForce Elite Club, I don't think Nvidia has officially announced this yet. I think this is all leaks, so keep that in mind. But with that club, if you pay $10 a month, they say you get a full copy of an exclusive indie game once per year. You get free custom skins or in-game items for a AAA game once per quarter. Be honest, who cares about that? Early beta access for Talos, and Nvidia first-party content, exclusive hardware discounts for gaming gear. Okay, so that's something. I guess the way I feel about it is, okay, let's go through it one by one. Exclusive indie game. I don't care about that. I'm not going to pay $120 a year to get that, because most indie games are probably going to be far, far less than that. There's a good chance you're not going to play it anyway. Let's be honest. Next one was custom skin, in-game item. There's no guarantee that it's for a game you play. I don't know how Nvidia is planning it. Maybe they look at your game library with GeForce Experience. That would certainly make sense, right? Because they can see all the games you have. That's part of the program. It's not a malicious thing. It's, here's the games this user has. Does the user want us to optimize the settings for the hardware they have? Yes or no? Easy enough. Now, one other way they could leverage that is, okay, based on these games, what can we give the user to justify their $10 a month premium payment once per quarter, so that they feel like they're getting something, rather than, say, if they give out a one-size-fits-all Dota skin and maybe half the people don't even play Dota. That would have no value for them. So that's a potential way it could be leveraged that would make more sense than what it sounds like just from the bullet points that we see online. I still would not pay for that. Personally speaking, that's my opinion. The next question was early beta access for Talos. I just don't care about Talos Principle. We benchmarked it a bit. That's what it's meant for. And if you want to play it as a game, you can buy it as a game. Exclusive hardware discounts. That's the last one that I've got some thoughts on, because I don't think, if Newegg or Amazon came to me and they said, we have a new service, you can pay us $10 per month and we will give you coupons to buy things from us, I think I would say no, and I would probably write an article or do a video about it, because it does seem kind of almost offensive from a retailer. Now, from a manufacturer, it's a bit different. From Nvidia, it's not quite as offensive as if a retailer came to me and said, you can pay us for the right to buy things for cheaper, which, of course, there are clubs where you can do that in physical retail, but not something I like. From Nvidia's standpoint, I just wouldn't recommend paying for a discount. One that kind of locks you in, because you feel like, I'm paying $120 a year, I really better get my value out of this thing. So if you get $100 off this card, maybe not that much, but you get some amount of money off the upgrade, then you feel like it's justified. That's the point of the program, right? It's not a malicious thing. It's just these companies, of course, they want you to stay loyal to them and keep buying their stuff. That's the hardest part of any money-making operation is you made the sale, okay, make them come back. Look at GoPro for the example of that. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. Now, AMD, I don't think is perfect either. So AMD's got Red Team Plus, which does the whole tout the brand and get free stuff. And it's just not, it's not a setup I like for either vendor. It builds on the video we just posted about the whole blind brand loyalty and vitriol being spewed because people have this incentive to do so beyond the normal incentive of I've spent money and have to defend my purchase. So that's my thoughts on it. Not a fan of either overall, but we'll see how Nvidia's actually comes into play because it's not really finalized yet. They could potentially do interesting things with it. Maybe they'll hook in something like whatever that program is called now. It used to be called Grid. I think it's GeForce Now these days. Something like that would be more interesting. That's game streaming. That would be a service you could pay for. Discounts and giveaways, no. Next question. Surpuppa asks, question for the next Ask GN. What is the physical difference between FreeSync and Gsync? Why does Gsync cost so much? Could Nvidia, in theory, use FreeSync and AMD Gsync? We have a whole article on this that's pretty good. It was written by Michael Kearns, and I believe it is called The Unproductive Relationship of Gsync and FreeSync or something like that. We basically talk about how the two of them existing don't achieve the goals that we would like to see, which is a more universal standard. But we do, in that article, Michael goes and lays out how each of the two services works. At a very top level, I'll give you the basics and you can go to the article for more because I don't want to spend the whole video talking about that, and it certainly could be done. The main points. Gsync does not have the same variable refresh rate that FreeSync has. It's done in the range doesn't exist on Gsync, where with FreeSync you have a variable refresh rate range and the monitors somewhat define that range, and the top end max, of course, is the maximum of the monitor's refresh rate. Gsync doesn't do it that way. Gsync physically, because you asked about what are the physical differences, the physical difference is that Gsync is a physical product, whereas FreeSync is not. So Gsync uses an FPGA board, and that's field programmable gate array. Uses an FPGA board, which are pretty easy to produce versus when you're looking at something like the way FreeSync rolled out initially. It's faster to roll out. FPGA board, that costs money. It's a physical component that goes on the monitor. And for some of the older ASUS very popular monitors, you could actually buy a kit to convert it into a Gsync display. So if you're curious about what it looks like not in a monitor, you could look that up. So that's the main thing in terms of physical differences. FreeSync uses the VBlank attribute. It was originally sort of exploited from the embedded display port spec. So this VBlank was in laptop displays and has been supported in monitor displays for a few years now. So that's how FreeSync operates. It operates on this attribute, VBlank, and from the DisplayPort spec. And AMD has also added their own HDMI sort of custom integration, so you can do it through that interface as well, not just DisplayPort. FreeSync and Gsync, they have different costs. Gsync costs a bit more. It's a physical component, so of course it's got a physical cost. FreeSync, although it is an attribute in the display and in that regard not as much a physical component, it still relies on the scaler. Even though it's integrated that way, there's still some cost. And we talked to Robert Hallock about this at CES maybe a year ago or this year or something. And the cost of FreeSync is basically just validation. So you pay a bit more because it's got to be validated. But it's not going to be as much as Gsync. That's not to say either's better or worse. It's just to say that FreeSync will be cheaper, but it's also not free. Next part of this that's worth going over. Gsync can work as low, it can work at frame rates like 20 FPS. It doesn't have the same low end limit that FreeSync has. Of course, in 20 FPS range, you're going to be getting basically a slideshow anyway, so the value is kind of debatable, but it does have a lower low end than AMD does. AMD uses, rather than the FPGA and all this other approach I just described, for FreeSync, they rely on the ASICs and the display. That's going to be the scalers to handle all the FreeSync adaptive refresh rate, basically. And ASICs, that integration is not necessarily quite as fast, but once it's been rolled out like it has been at this point, now that all these display vendors support it and suppliers support FreeSync, it's not as big of a deal that it's slower to market initially because it's out on the market now. See if there's any other points I wrote down that are important to note. FreeSync doesn't work, at least initially, outside of the monitor's FreeSync range. Still doesn't, so monitor's got a listed range on it, doesn't work outside of that. They do have some low frame rate compensation now that I haven't really tested and written articles about, but that's something worth looking into. And then finally, FreeSync uses variable refresh rate over DisplayPort. It has custom protocols for HDMI, as I said. G-Sync's range is limited by the refresh rate of the panel, maximum refresh. And our thoughts in that article were basically, ideally, the two companies work together and make a more uniform standard with a fixed frequency range, something like 24 hertz to the max refresh, maybe 144, 200, or whatever. That would be best. But I think that answers most of it. They're not going to use each other's technologies, though. That's not going to happen. Next question, Super Goody says, hypothetically, the Ryzen chipset comes out and the prices of the Intel chips drop. Will each tier of processor drop equally or depending on tier? So the high range of Intel chips drops more than the mid-range, and low range will drop in price the least. Purely hypothetical. I do not think you will see a change in price for Intel. At most, I would expect $10 to $20, but that would be in step with their normal generational jaunt, not because of AMD and Ryzen. It's more likely that they would drop it because they, or at least retailers, tend to always drop the price of the i5 and i7 about $10 when the new one comes out, maybe a few months later. You see that reduction. But I would not bank on a price change for Intel based on Ryzen. It's just not something they've really ever done, and I don't think they feel enough pressure to make that change. If AMD started really clawing back market share, maybe, but Intel, I think, feels probably fairly confident in the desktop market right now, and people are used to paying what they pay for Intel processors. I don't know. We'll see, but I don't really... Maybe. I think i5s and i7s in the core family of processors will probably not change in price, but once you get into the Extreme series stuff, maybe there's a price change because it's a lot harder there to justify the high $1,000 plus prices if AMD can actually compete in that segment. That might make more sense, but I wouldn't say for the average gamer it would matter. Last question, Wise Guy says, how are you still such a small channel? That question got a lot of upvotes. Probably because it's technical content, but please feel free to share as always. And I would tell you to like, but I don't know that it actually does anything. I will ask that you subscribe, though. Subscribe and share. That does something. Likes and dislikes, I don't know. Comments are arranged in totally haphazard order, depending on if you're logged in or not. We see them in a different order than you guys do if we're logged in. Just realized that recently. So your upvotes do nothing unless we open an incognito window and look at it as a raw user. So thank you for watching. As always, Patreon link in the postal video if you want to help us out directly. Links in the description below for more information. Subscribe, don't bother liking, and I'll see you all next time.